This is Marcus Whitney's audio universe.
Like, you gotta do the work. You gotta show up and just do the work.
What's good? Happy Monday. How's everybody doing out there? Another episode of Marcus Whitney Live. We're continuing our conversation series around the blue economy, around climate change, around innovation, around how brave entrepreneurs and scientists are coming together to come up with novel ways to keep our shoreline safe, to keep our communities safe, to keep us being able to enjoy the ocean and living where we currently live and enjoy and find so much value in. Today, my guest on that topic is Sam Teicher. Sam is the CEO of Coral Vita. He is talking to us today from the Bahamas. So there's some recent news about the Bahamas last night that will be interesting to talk about. But for now, Sam, thanks so much for joining the show, man.
Thanks for having me on, Marcus, and thanks for everyone else.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for being here. So let's just kind of, jump right in, man. First of all, let's give a quick background on you and, sort of how you came into this work of farming coral reefs.
So I definitely did not grow up imagining I was going to be a coral farmer. I'm from DC originally, and my background was in education reform and national security. So obviously I ended up going into coral reef restoration. While I was in grad school, my friend Gator and I were thinking about a lot of the biggest environmental problems that we as society and the planet are facing that governments and nonprofits and academia weren't solving at the pace and scale needed to really make the difference that is required. And I've been a scuba diver since I was a kid. Oceans are my favorite places on Earth. And I had an experience doing coral reef restoration while living out in the country of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, and saw how a reef can come back to life, but also saw that the existing model for reef restoration doesn't cut it for the scale of the problem. And that problem is we've lost half the world's coral reefs since the 1970s and are currently on track to lose over 90% in the next 30 years. Now, when people think of coral reefs...
I was about to say, let's just stop right there. Those are big numbers. So can you just talk about the importance of the coral reef? I feel like, we're all so separated from nature, like we may not really understand like what a big deal that is. So let's talk about just coral reefs.
So if you want to just think about it from a pure inspiration and majestic perspective, I am biased, but I think coral reefs are one of the most incredible ecosystems on the planet, whether it's from Finding Nemo or Blue Planet, whatever. If you are a diver, if you've never been by one, you think of just the range of colors and organisms and life that exists there. They take up less than 1% of the ocean floor, but coral reefs support a quarter of all marine life. Wow. So they're pretty damn important for the environment. But then if we just strip away that personal connection that I and you and many people have to nature and think, oh, what do we really care about it? They're really important to humanity. So on the conservative estimates, they generate $30 billion a year through tourism and fisheries and coastal protection. A healthy reef reduces wave energy by 97%. So reefs save lives, they create jobs, they feed people. And they support in total up to 1 billion people around the world. So as reefs die, they put a lot of people's lives, a lot of industries, a lot of nations on the line. And in the context of COVID even, there are already drugs made for antiviral or cancer treatments that are derived from compounds found on coral reefs. So losing these reefs, which is happening right now before our eyes, it's not a prediction for the future, one of the greatest challenges that's facing our planet and our species right now.
Wow. Okay. That was what I wanted to get. Let's get back into your story and how you got here. But I just wanted the context because I know even the first time we talked, it was a question I had, about the importance of coral reefs. And once you think about it like that, it's like, yeah, of course, this is really, really important.
It's a pretty reasonable thing to think, oh, it's just a pretty thing that's out there, not that it's a socioeconomic engine that if you care about refugees, where are people going to go when they can't feed their families or their homes are underwater? Or if you want to go on a vacation to a beautiful sandy beach or eat that seafood dinner on your plate, even if you're in the middle of Oklahoma, there's a connection to no matter where you are on the planet. And so all of that value in mind and the wonder too, we need to protect reefs. Now, the best thing to do is to stop killing them. I hope I get put out of my job whereby the governments and business leaders responsible for solving climate change pollution, doing what's necessary to mitigate these threats, step up and actually fulfill their responsibilities. But we also live in a time where not only is that not happening, but we also need to rapidly upscale adaptation solutions to climate change. And that's where we fit in with Coral Vita. So what we do is we grow coral to restore dying reefs. We teamed up with some of the world's leading scientists, incorporating breakthrough methods to grow corals up to 50 times faster, which is months instead of decades, and then strengthen their resilience to threats that are killing them, like warming and acidifying oceans. And then the other big innovation that we're doing, coral farming has been around for about 2 decades. There are amazing NGOs, practitioners, scientists around the world that have been working in this space, but it's largely been small scale, or a lagoon here, funded by a grant or a donation there. That's what I did while I was just, and given the scale of the problem, that's not going to cut it. So we are not only using this breakthrough science, but creating a whole new business model, looking at that value, the tourism, fisheries, coastal protection of reefs, and basically selling the service of reef restoration to hotels, insurers, governments, corporate sponsors. Anyone with skin in the game can hire us to restore their reefs. And then our farms are put on land, and that lets us do a number of things. But one, the farms become tourism attractions that generate revenue. It's a fun experience to come see us growing corals in action. And it's also become education centers for local communities. So that's, for Coral Beach, what we're all about. We launched our first farm in Grand Bahama, and ultimately we want to launch farms like this all around the world.
So help us to visualize what a coral farm looks like. Like, how do you grow coral?
The simplest analogy I can provide is if you imagine you take a cutting from a tree or a flower that you can then graft and it'll grow. So there are 2 ways to grow coral. We focus on one more than the other, but we do both. Then that is fragmentation and then sexual propagation. So fragmentation is like that cutting. So we go out from the reefs, we take cuttings of living coral. Coral, by the way, are actually animals that have plants living inside of them that make rock for their skeleton. So they're pretty fascinating creatures. But one of the things is, just like with the fragments you could take from plants, we take these fragments, we bring them to our farm, which is on land. And we have tanks that we're pumping clean seawater through under a shade cloth. So we're basically creating almost like a spa-like treatment for these corals. And then using these methods, we're able to accelerate the growth rates, so that we basically cut up the corals into little pieces, and that triggers a healing process, almost like scar tissue. And so sometimes one piece of coral from the size of a coin to the size of your hand could take 25, 50 years. We can now grow those in 6, 12 months, maybe 18 months. And then we also can control the growing conditions, the water quality, and not only make it spa treatment, but also basically take them to the gym. Look at what scientists say the projections for future ocean temperatures are. Crank up the temperature gradually, bring it back down, stress the corals, that when we 6, 12, 18 months, and they've been growing on our farms, we plant them in the reefs, they grow on their own, and then they also have built in a new resilience to things that are killing them. So it's basically just like setting up a nursery, but we're doing it for corals.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So where did this technology and this process come from that you all are bringing to the market?
So while Gator and I were in grad school, we were kind of coming up with this idea for a business model, and there were these methods for growing corals. And there was a story that came out in the New York Times in 2018 of Dr. David Vaughn. He was formerly the coral restoration program manager at the Moat Marine Lab. And he had this breakthrough known as microfragmenting, where he realized using these natural healing processes, it could be applied for coral restoration to unlock amazing species diversity for corals, because some of them really do take decades and decades to grow to a mature size. And so we reached out to him. We actually had a $1,000 grant from the school at that point. That was about it. So we were able to fly down to the Keys, meet with him and some other scientists and coral experts, rent a car, but that was it. There wasn't really Airbnbs in the Keys. So Gator and I were sleeping in our car as we made it. And it was worse for Gator because I might have snored a little bit over the course of the trip. But Dr. Vaughn ended up coming on as our advisor. We then reached out to Dr. Ruth Gates. She was formerly the president of the International Society of Reef Studies. She's at the forefront, or she had pioneered the field of assisted evolution, which is how do we strengthen the resilience of corals to climate change. She joined us as an advisor. She tragically passed away from cancer recently, but we kept on building relationships with more scientists and practitioners, and basically helping incorporate their methods and creating our own, building partnerships, because ultimately we're all on the same team in this, to basically take this science that's proven and then apply our model on top of it to help scale it up. Because one of the big things that's held back coral farming thus far is how do you fund large-scale restoration projects? The biggest project ever, you grew 40,000 corals. Again, imagine that's almost like 40,000 saplings that have been planted. Funded by a grant once, then the grant expired, that was the end of the project. We need to be growing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of corals every year at each farm in every country with reefs. And so we then built those scientific methods into our process with the business model working to unlock the funding to support needed large-scale restoration.
Wow. That's intense. So now you're bringing this brand new model, not just the technology, but this model that was previously done in sort of one-off philanthropic, efforts and initiatives into a scalable, repeatable business model. What has that been like? This was something I had asked Blaine about, just this whole idea of the blue economy, especially right now where we're dealing with a pandemic around a virus. It's like, these science-based concepts and ideas seem to be very difficult for us to frame well and internalize from an economic perspective. What has it been like for you trying to bring this to the market, educate people, the narrative? Do the hotels get it right away? Or do they just take for granted that this thing that they monetize is always going to be there?
It has been a journey, and you hit the nail right on the head with that piece, the education piece for us. It's definitely a difficult challenge, but at the same time, an exciting one. Is we're not only building a company, which is difficult in its own right. Any entrepreneur, as you know, can testify to that. And then an environmental and mission-driven one, but also when we're effectively building the market as we go. We're not disrupting a system that exists. We're basically helping convince people that this is a huge asset that they depend on. So as a hotel owner, for example, if people are coming to snorkel and scuba dive and you don't have a reef, they're probably not going to come stay at your resort. Not to mention, there's an insurance piece at play, because if that reef is healthy, it's going to reduce wave energy so that if a hurricane comes through, you less damages from the storm. So we've had hotel owners who are like, I get it, this makes sense. We need to do a project like this. And we've had hotel managers, $1,000 Italian loafers, and don't understand that they have an asset in the ocean because they only see what's on land. So it does depend who you're talking to, and it definitely continues to be a journey, but it does give us a sort of sandbox-like approach where we can help create things the way we think they should be. Doesn't always happen, but you also, I think, when I say you, I should say, like, we are all aided by the fact that right now a lot of attention is being paid to this space. So the UN actually declared this is the decade of ecosystem restoration. There's a lot of major players who you wouldn't really think of as being progressive when it comes to climate action, like the insurance industry, actually developing a scheme where they're basically saying, hey, coastal property owners, if you pay to restore reefs, your premiums may go down because this is going to result in less of a payout. Foreign debt being forgiven in exchange for conservation, sustainable development. There's a lot of these things that are coming online as we build out the business. So there's a lot of connecting the dots and pieces. There's almost a political hat that has to be played, and which is kind of fun to work in this space in the global ecosystem. But there's been lows for sure, from Hurricane Dorian to the pandemic to plane crashes to business deals falling through. But it also is incredibly exciting to be able to help move this space in a way that needs to happen, in a way that's going to benefit so many people, so in a collaborative fashion.
So, I do healthcare venture capital for a living, and that means I work with incredible entrepreneurs bringing new technologies, new methods, new protocols that will lower cost, improve outcomes. And one of the biggest challenges is that the healthcare industry is a, quote unquote, high reliability industry, which means that it's dealing with very, very sensitive subject, which is the lives of human beings. And so embracing innovation has to go through paces, right? In order for it to be something that can be adopted and then adapted into the existing high reliability systems. So, my question to you is, in this world of ecological restoration, which the UN has now said this is the decade of it, it feels like this is really important, but it's also very new, right? So it's not like it's high reliability. There's no reliability. There's no infrastructure for it. How is a startup received in this space where, quite frankly, it's like you may be able to prove what you're doing from a tech perspective. And in this case, I don't mean technology like computers. I mean your farming technology, right?
Right.
You may be able to prove that, but the long-term efficacy, will the corals last as long? There's all sorts of questions, right, at the end of the day. How do you deal with that? The unprovenness of being a startup and innovating, trying to help something so incredibly important.
I kind of feel like Neo in that scene in with the big shootout, and when he's like dodging all the bullets and it's going in slow motion, and you're just like, wow, how is he doing that? And it's pretty cool and also terrifying at the same time. It's a good and it's a tough question. I mean, yeah, like I said, we're creating a market that doesn't exist. We're working with high political leaders and local communities and trying to make sure that the water quality is good at our farm. And so I guess the reality is that it needs to happen no matter what. So I guess there's that kind of like resolve that it's just like, I don't care if you don't believe me. I'm going to do everything possible to convince you. And if you don't, there are other people that are going to believe this, and we're going to keep. The point you actually said about infrastructure is effectively we're trying to deploy and develop the infrastructure to support large-scale restoration around the world in perpetuity, right? But it doesn't exist yet. And people are paying for it. There are hotels that are paying for it. The U.S. government actually has allocated funding for coral restoration. So you're seeing the market shift coming, but it is still nascent. And there's a lot of hats Gator and I have to wear that require us to sort of change who we are on the day and how we approach, know our audience, roll with the punches. And so it's not a fully definitive answer to your question, but that's kind of how we deal with it, is just this recognition that we can't live in a world without coral reefs, and we're faced with that reality. So we got to just make it happen.
How important has, and I hate to sort of say this because, this has happened in healthcare, right? It's like we've had telehealth technology, adequate telehealth technology for a decade, okay? But we did not have the regulatory support to actually allow it to be widespread adopted. All sorts of really kind of ridiculous legislature that would limit, doctors being able to serve patients across state lines, and just really silly things, right? But they're laws that are basically there preventing progress, but saying that they're there to keep patients safe, right? At the end of the day, but they're really there to prevent progress. And then you have something like COVID-19 happen, and then all of a sudden those laws magically disappear because we need the doctors to serve the patients wherever they are, right? So my question then for your world is, as unfortunate and devastating as the increasingly intense hurricane seasons have been, right? How much is that driving willingness for people to come to the table and talk to you, and because you talked about the importance of the coral reef in terms of, I forget the word you used, but you said basically it's got an important role when it comes to waves, right?
Yeah, coastal protection. So I mean, I was in this room during Hurricane Dorian last year. I'm on the second floor of the house. We're elevated. It was the strongest recorded storm in the Bahamas, one of the most powerful in Atlantic history. We were ready to cut a hole in this ceiling to go up to the roof if we had to, and we knew people were doing that on other parts of the island. Somehow the waves didn't rise here. But off the south shore of Grand Bahama, which is kind of where we're located, there are mangrove forests, and there are reefs, and they saved people's lives. There's no other way of saying that. One remote island to the east end, after we were doing a lot of humanitarian stuff after Dorian, they got the eye of the storm, and the storm changed 3 directions everywhere but west on them. Everyone there, even though there was total devastation, we asked, how are you still alive? And person after person was like, it's the mangroves surrounding our island. And 20 minutes away from this place, Sweeting Skis in McLeanstown, a very similar situation in terms of how the homes were built and who was living. They cut down most of their mangroves, and the death toll there was much higher.
Wow.
And so, no, I don't at all wish for those types of experiences for anyone, but it's the fact of the matter is that you sometimes need a crisis to drive action. I'd be hopeful that the current global crisis we're going through, whether it's climate change or the pandemic, people to act. It unfortunately is not in many cases, but at the context of Coral Vita, at least, a lot of our ability to communicate it went up a level, because we, not only from firsthand experience, but then you sort of take that in with how big corporations like insurance companies are viewing those events. It does have a dramatic force in terms of moving the needle.
So, we definitely did not time this episode this way, but last night was a big night of news in the Bahamas. I woke up this morning and was just looking through my Google feed, and it must have known that I was talking to Sam, who's in the Grand Bahamas, because it was like, hey, the Bahamas just limited travel in and out with regards to COVID-19. And whenever I think about those types of limitations, I always think about the impact to businesses. So I was wondering, if you could talk a little bit about what's actually happening there, sort of what you're experiencing, and just generally speaking, like COVID-19 in the Bahamas, for those of us who don't know and don't have any point of reference for it.
So the borders closed originally in March, and in March and July 1st, when the borders opened back up again, there was about 100 cases throughout the whole country. And since July 1st, we've had like 60 new cases. And Grand Bahama is 50, 60 miles off the coast of West Palm Beach. And I am very proud to be an American despite our warts and stereotypes. But at this particular moment, it is frustrating to be an American abroad and seeing a whole country suffer because of my country's actions, because a lot of people in Florida came over here not wearing masks, wanting to have a good time, and didn't respect the social distancing rules and mask rules that had been in place that people here had been following. And now the country is shutting itself down again. And in the Bahamas, they're reliant, I think 60% of the GDP is reliant on tourism. So as a nation, especially with one tied to America, it's devastating. It's also pretty incredible that they said Americans aren't allowed to come here, but Europeans and Canadians can.
Wow.
That's fairly embarrassing. But people are listening to experts and listening to scientists, and it's like I said at the beginning, I want to be put out of my job. I don't want to be a coral farmer. I hope there's no more reefs left to restore. But because we're not listening to experts and scientists when it comes to climate change, things are getting worse. And when it comes to not listening to experts and scientists on the pandemic, there are real world consequences for that, obviously in terms of public health. But here in the Bahamas, for our business, one of our revenue streams, like I said before, was you're looking for something fun to do, you come to our coral farm. There's a touch tank. You learn about reefs. You get to maybe even go out and plant corals or adopt them with our team. We're not getting tourists anytime soon. There are unemployment, I think, in Grand Bahama might be up to 80%.
Oh my God.
And we already were dealing with we still hadn't recovered from Hurricane Dorian. So it's a big blow for sure. And it's tough because a lot of these island nations, not just in the Bahamas, but in the Caribbean and around the world, they can't keep the borders closed for 2 years, but they also don't really often have the health infrastructure to deal with the consequences of the fallout. So I'm really hopeful that people will be respectful of the places that the communities that they're in, whether it's their own or they're visiting them, because it has financial, health, and spiritual implications too. I mean, it's a big morale blow for people here to have just been getting back online after Dorian, and then the pandemic comes in the first place, and then we weathered the lockdowns and we were following the rules. We opened the borders back up, and we get screwed again. And it's not just applicable to Coral Vita. It's not just applicable to the Bahamas. And it happened last night. That's what the Prime Minister announced. So that's the new reality.
Wow. Yeah, 80% unemployment. I mean, that is just, I'm speechless. That is a just shocking.
Yeah,
number.
I mean, it might be 60 to 80%. It fluctuates, but still is a stupidly high number. And yeah, we're very, very grateful not only obviously to be in a position where we were able to stay open, even just without having revenue. We had enough runway we raised from our investors. We're actually in the middle right now of raising an investment round to expand our farm here into the biggest farm in the world for coral reef restoration. But the government also gave us an exemption to keep operating. So it's a big part of our model to take a community-based approach as much as possible. Ultimately, the reefs matter most for the people who on them or near them. So most of our staff is Bahamian, and we aren't doing the education stuff in addition to the tourism stuff right now. But at the very least, we're able to keep our staff employed, which a lot of people aren't able to do right now because of what's happening.
Man, I can't help but just think about. I'm enjoying covering this blue economy stuff and this climate change stuff because it's not very charged at the moment. You know what I mean? There's much more charge around the pandemic, and it's such an incredible opportunity to learn from innovators such as yourself who are having continuing to do the work. But I can't help but draw the parallels between our failure to sort of connect the guidance of scientists with how we're going to fare economically, right? And us seeing the economy as somehow this like separate and different and maybe even like competitive philosophy or entity from science, where they're not, they're connected. And it's just it just makes you wonder about humanity, that we on these issues of climate change and public health, we can't connect the dots. We can't adhere to guidance of scientists. And this is at an individual level, but it's also at a corporate level, right? You know what I mean? I mean, often so many of the big offenses are really happening at the corporate level,
Yeah, it's on me. It's on government, business, and media leaders to get us working on climate change. And the point you raise is it's super frustrating, but that's actually why I still remain optimistic and excited, is because I come at this from the perspective, again, grounded in a love for nature and wildlife, but also appreciating that's not good enough for most people. And that the economic case it's actually a no-brainer. There was a study that came out from the World Resources Institute, I think last week, that for every $1 you invest in ocean protection, it's $5 in dividends. I could rattle off a lot of stats right now, but at the end of the day, it's a huge economic opportunity, and it's also an imperative for our own well-being to take care of the planet, right? We do this, we create more wealth. It doesn't mean jobs disappear on the net, but I mean, I don't know. I'm just like at the mindset where you don't weep for horse and buggy drivers and switchboard operators. And there needs to be a just transition for people that do get left behind, but we shouldn't be relying on 19th and 20th century technologies and systems when we know not only are 21st century ones better for us health-wise and for the environment, but also are massive economic opportunities. It's right in front of us. And that's where the blue economy, like you said, it isn't as politically charged. We can do amazing things to protect the planet that ultimately sustains all of us while creating amazing economic opportunities. Same go. It's like, yeah, why aren't we doing this? Let's go. The failure is not an option here also at the same time, because we were on the clock when it comes to losing these ecosystems. So there's that impetus to, then we have amazing ecosystems for our kids to be able to visit, and grandchildren and so on. And it's what we got to do.
Well, Sam, thank you for doing the work. Thanks for sharing the story and also giving us the update on what's going on in the Bahamas. Totally appreciate it. 30 minutes always goes quick here, man. So we'll have to sort of bring you back to give us an update on how things are progressing there.
It was a pleasure to be here. If anyone ever wants to come down and plant some coral with us, we're happy to have you in the Bahamas, and you can check us out at Coral Vita Reefs. And Marcus, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, man. So like Sam said, go follow him at Coral Vita Reefs on Twitter, on Instagram, coralvita.co. That's where you can keep up with them, the innovation that they're providing, and the story they're trying to tell to get people aware of the importance of restoration of the coral reefs. Again, my book, Create and Orchestrate, out now. Go pick up the copy. Subscribe to the podcast, Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe, everywhere that you get your favorite podcast, and follow me everywhere online at Marcus Whitney. That's it. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and I will see y'all back here tomorrow. Come on, y'all, let's build a new normal.
Thank you for tuning in to Marcus Whitney's Audio Universe.